You watch as colleagues with inferior ideas get promoted while your brilliant strategies are dismissed or stolen. Every day you present logical arguments and ethical solutions, yet somehow the office politicians and smooth talkers always seem to win the day, leaving you frustrated and overlooked despite your superior competence. I am Niccolò Machiavelli, and I spent my life studying power, not as it should be, but as it truly operates in the real world. For over 500 years, leaders have used my principles to navigate treacherous political waters and emerge victorious, understanding that influence is not about manipulation in the sinister sense, but about mastering the art of persuasion and strategic thinking. What I discovered about human nature and power dynamics will transform how you navigate your professional world, giving you the tools to finally make your voice heard and your ideas implemented. The battlefield may have changed from Renaissance Italy to modern offices, but the principles of influence and strategic positioning remain as powerful today as they were in my time. But first, like this video, subscribe for more timeless wisdom and comment below where you're watching from. I want to know which corner of the world is ready for a strategic mastery. I was born into a world where power changed hands like coins in a marketplace, and survival depended on understanding the currency of influence. My father, Bernardo Machiavelli, was a lawyer whose contracts and legal writings first taught me that words could be both weapons and shields. I would watch him craft documents that could protect a merchant's fortune or destroy a rival's reputation with nothing more than carefully chosen phrases and strategic omissions. Florence in 1469 was a city drunk on its own ambitions, where the Medici family had transformed from wool merchants into de facto rulers through nothing more than strategic loans and calculated generosity. I witnessed firsthand how Cosimo de' Medici's grandson, Lorenzo the Magnificent, wielded influence not through force, but through understanding what people needed and positioning himself as the only one who could provide it. My childhood was spent in the shadows of political upheaval. When the Pazzi conspiracy attempted to murder Lorenzo de' Medici during Easter Mass in 1478, I learned that power without understanding human nature is fragile. The conspirators believed that killing Lorenzo would automatically transfer his influence to them, but they failed to understand that Lorenzo's true power lay not in his title, but in the networks of obligation and gratitude he had carefully constructed over decades. My father's legal practice exposed me to the mechanics of human motivation. I observed how wealthy merchants would visit our home, seeking contracts that would give them advantage over competitors, and how my father would craft language that appeared to benefit both parties while subtly favoring his client. He taught me that the most effective influence is invisible, when people believe they have chosen freely while being guided toward the outcome you desired. The fall of the Medici in 1494, when they were expelled from Florence, provided my most crucial early lesson in the temporary nature of all power structures. I watched as Lorenzo's son Piero, who had inherited his father's position but not his political wisdom, lost everything through arrogance and miscalculation. This taught me that influence is not inherited. It must be earned and maintained through constant attention to the shifting currents of human desire and organizational dynamics. When Girolamo Savonarola rose to power as Florence's spiritual leader, I observed how he used fear and righteousness to control behavior, creating temporary compliance through emotional manipulation. But I also witnessed his downfall when he overreached, proving that influence built solely on negative emotions is ultimately unstable. People will follow fear only until they find courage, but they will follow someone who provides genuine benefit indefinitely. These early experiences shaped my understanding that successful influence requires three foundational elements: the ability to read human motivation accurately, the patience to build relationships systematically, and the flexibility to adapt your approach when circumstances change. I learned that the leaders who lasted were not necessarily the strongest or smartest, but those who best understood the wants and fears of the people around them. My education continued through direct observation of Florence's Republican government, where I saw how influence operates in democratic systems. Unlike monarchies where power flows from the top down, republics require horizontal influence, the ability to persuade equals rather than command subordinates. This taught me that the most transferable influence skills are those that work regardless of formal authority. My greatest teacher in human nature was not a book or a mentor, but a prison cell in the Palazzo Vecchio, where I learned that even in captivity, understanding human psychology could mean the difference between survival and destruction. In 1513, accused of conspiracy against the Medici, I found myself suspended by my wrists in the strappato, my shoulders dislocating with each drop, as my interrogators demanded confessions I could not give. But even in that agony, I observed, I studied my torturers, noting how they took breaks when their enthusiasm waned, how they responded differently to defiance versus submission, how their own discomfort with the process created opportunities for psychological maneuvering. I learned that every human interaction, no matter how extreme, follows patterns that can be understood and influenced. My cellmate was a petty thief named Antonio, who had survived 3 previous imprisonments through what he called reading the guards. He taught me to watch for the subtle signs that revealed each person's motivations. The guard who could be flattered because he felt undervalued, the official who could be reasoned with because he prided himself on fairness, the administrator who could be influenced through appeals to efficiency because he feared chaos above all else. This experience revealed the fundamental truth about human nature that would guide all my future work. People's actions are driven not by their stated principles, but by their deepest fears and desires. The guard who claimed to value justice was actually motivated by his need for respect. The official who spoke of duty was driven by his terror of making mistakes. Understanding these hidden motivations was the key to predicting and influencing behavior. I developed what I called the mask principle, the understanding that everyone wears different personas in different circumstances, and successful influence requires seeing through these masks to the true motivations beneath. The harsh interrogator who seemed ruthless during official questioning might reveal himself as a devoted father during casual conversation, providing insight into what actually drives his decisions. My exile from Florence taught me more about organizational politics than all my years of active service, because suddenly I found myself on the outside looking in, forced to maintain influence without formal position or power. Through my correspondence with Francesco Vettori, who remained connected to the Medici court, I learned how to navigate the treacherous waters of office politics from a position of disadvantage. The fundamental challenge in any organizationally hierarchy is that everyone serves multiple masters simultaneously. You report to your official superior, but you also depend on peers for cooperation, subordinates for execution, and informal power brokers for information and support. I discovered that most people fail at office politics because they focus only on managing upward relationships while neglecting the complex web of lateral and downward influences that actually determine success. When I was second chancellor of Florence, I made the mistake of believing that competence and official authority were sufficient for influence. I delivered excellent results, managed complex diplomatic missions successfully, and earned the respect of foreign dignitaries, but I failed to invest adequately in the internal political relationships that could have protected me when the Medici returned to power. My exile taught me that no one is irreplaceable, regardless of their competence, if they lack political protection. From my forced retirement, I observed how successful courtiers operated within the new Medici administration. They understood that organizational hierarchies have both formal and informal power structures, and that true influence required mastery of both. The formal structure was documented in organizational charts and job descriptions, but the informal structure was based on relationships, favors, information flow, and personal loyalties that were invisible to outsiders. I learned to map these informal networks by studying who had access to whom, who was consulted before decisions were made, and whose opinions carried disproportionate weight in group discussions. The most influential people were often not those with the highest titles, but those who sat at the intersection of multiple information streams and could serve as bridges between different factions or departments. One crucial insight was understanding the difference between allies and friends. Allies share common interests and will support you as long as that support serves their goals. Friends have personal loyalty that transcends immediate self-interest. In organizational politics, you need both, but you must never confuse them. Expecting ally-level support from friends can strain personal relationships, while expecting friend-level loyalty from allies leads to disappointment and betrayal. The art of building alliances requires understanding what each person values and finding ways to provide it without compromising your own objectives. Some people value recognition and status. Others prefer information and access. Still others want security and predictability. The most effective political operators I observed were those who became valuable to multiple constituencies by understanding and serving these different needs. I discovered that neutrality in office politics is often interpreted as weakness or indifference. During conflicts between different factions, attempts to remain above the fray usually result in being viewed with suspicion by all sides. Instead, I learned to practice strategic alignment, supporting the winning side when outcomes were clear, but positioning myself as a valuable resource to all parties when conflicts were uncertain. The management of information flow proved crucial to political influence. In my correspondence with Vittori, I carefully controlled what information I shared and when, understanding that knowledge is power only when others lack access to it. I learned to become someone others came to for insight and analysis, making myself valuable through my ability to interpret events and predict outcomes rather than through my access to raw information. One of the most delicate aspects of office politics is managing relationships with people at different hierarchical levels. Simultaneously, when speaking with superiors, I learned to demonstrate respect and competence while subtly positioning myself as someone whose counsel was valuable. With peers, I focused on building mutual benefit relationships based on shared challenges and complementary strengths. With subordinates, I invested in their development and success, understanding that their loyalty and effectiveness reflected on my leadership. The timing of political moves proved as important as their substance. I observed that the most successful political operators waited for moments when the organization was facing challenges or transitions, when the value of their support or expertise was most apparent. They avoided making demands during stable periods when their leverage was minimal, instead building goodwill and positioning themselves for moments when their influence could be most effectively deployed. Perhaps most importantly, I learned that sustainable political influence requires maintaining your reputation for competence and integrity while playing the political game effectively. People must believe that you deliver results and can be trusted, even as you engage in the strategic relationship building and information management that characterizes successful organizational politics. The moment you are seen as purely political, without substance, your influence begins to erode. My years of exile taught me that organizational politics is not about manipulation or deception, but about understanding how decisions really get made and relationships really work within complex human systems. Those who master these dynamics can maintain influence even when circumstances change, while those who ignore them remain vulnerable regardless of their competence or good intentions. My drafts for the Florentine Constitution revealed to me that Influencing democratic systems requires completely different skills than influencing monarchies or hierarchical organizations. In republics, power is distributed among equals who must be persuaded rather than commanded, and success depends on building consensus while maintaining strategic direction toward your objectives. During my years serving the Florentine Republic, I learned that collective decision-making creates both opportunities and challenges for influence. The opportunity lies in the fact that no single person can dictate outcomes, meaning that skilled practitioners of influence can shape decisions through coalition building and strategic persuasion. The challenge is that democratic processes are inherently messy, time-consuming, and vulnerable to emotional manipulation by those who understand crowd psychology. The fourth principle is authority, people's natural deference to expertise and legitimate power. I built influence by establishing my credibility through demonstrated competence, relevant experience, and association with respected institutions or individuals. This required continuously developing my knowledge and skills while finding appropriate ways to communicate my qualifications without appearing arrogant or self-promoting. The fifth principle is liking, the simple truth that people are more easily influenced by those they like and trust. I learned to build liking through finding genuine common ground, expressing sincere appreciation for others' contributions, and demonstrating personal interest in their success and well-being. The key is authenticity. People can detect false flattery, but they respond powerfully to genuine respect and affinity. The sixth principle is scarcity, the increased value people place on things that are rare or potentially unavailable. I discovered that influence often comes from controlling access to valuable resources, whether those are opportunities, information, relationships, or expertise. By positioning myself as a gateway to things others needed, I created natural influence without appearing manipulative. The art of applying these principles lies in understanding that they work best when combined and when their use appears natural rather than calculated. During my diplomatic missions, I would typically begin by establishing credibility and liking, then provide value through information or assistance. Seek small commitments that aligned with my objectives, demonstrate that others had made similar choices, and create appropriate urgency around timing or availability. Timing proves crucial to the effective application of influence techniques. Each principle has optimal moments for deployment. Reciprocity works best when the person has a clear need that you can address. Commitment consistency is most powerful when people are already moving in your direction and need only small nudges to accelerate their progress. Social proof is most effective when people are uncertain and looking for guidance from others they respect. I learned to create dependency without appearing manipulative by making myself genuinely valuable to others in ways that aligned with my own interests. This might involve developing expertise that others needed, building relationships that could benefit multiple parties, or creating systems that improved efficiency while increasing my influence over important processes. The strategic use of benefits and consequences requires understanding what people truly value and fear. Surface-level motivations are often misleading. The executive who claims to care only about profits might actually be driven by fear of failure, while the colleague who appears focused on recognition might actually value security above all else. Effective influence requires understanding these deeper motivations and crafting approaches that address them. Perhaps most importantly, I discovered that sustainable influence requires building your reputation as someone who uses these techniques ethically and in service of mutual benefit. If people believe you are manipulating them for purely selfish purposes, they will resist even beneficial proposals. The most influential people are those who have aligned their interests with the interests of others, making their success dependent on helping others succeed. The master practitioner learns to make influence invisible by making it feel like natural collaboration and mutual problem-solving. When done properly, people don't feel influenced. They feel heard, understood, and supported in achieving their own objectives, which happen to align with yours. Lorenzo de' Medici's public proclamations taught me one of the most crucial lessons about influence. Your reputation is often more valuable than your actual accomplishments because people respond to what they believe to be true rather than what is actually true. I observed how the Medici family carefully managed their public image, appearing as benevolent patrons of the arts while simultaneously pursuing ruthless business and political interests. The foundation of reputation management is understanding that every action, statement, and association sends signals about your character and competence. I learned to think strategically about these signals, ensuring that my public behavior consistently reinforced the image I wanted to project. This was not about deception, but about emphasizing certain aspects of my personality and accomplishments, while being more discreet about others. When I served as second chancellor, I made the mistake of believing that excellent work would speak for itself. I delivered successful diplomatic missions, managed complex negotiations, and provided valuable analysis to the government, but I failed to ensure that the right people knew about these accomplishments and understood their significance. My exile taught me that competence without visibility is often less valuable than moderate competence with strong reputation management. I discovered that credibility must be built systematically through consistent demonstration of expertise, integrity, and results. This required carefully choosing which projects to take on, ensuring that my contributions were visible to key stakeholders, and finding appropriate ways to share my successes without appearing boastful. The art lies in letting others discover and celebrate your accomplishments rather than promoting them directly. The difference between being good and appearing good became clear to me through studying various political figures. Some leaders possessed genuine virtue, but failed to communicate it effectively, leading to mistrust and resistance from people who misunderstood their motives. Others had significant character flaws, but projected images of competence and integrity that allowed them to maintain influence despite their shortcomings. I learned that appearing virtuous requires understanding which virtues your audience values most highly. In Florence's merchant culture, prudence and reliability were prized above courage or magnanimity. When dealing with military leaders, I emphasized different aspects of my character than when negotiating with bankers or scholars. This was not hypocrisy, but strategic authenticity, highlighting genuine aspects of my personality that resonated most strongly with each audience. The management of your professional brand requires attention to both positive messaging and damage control. I developed techniques for amplifying good news while minimizing the impact of setbacks or failures. When things went wrong, I learned to take appropriate responsibility while framing the situation in ways that demonstrated learning and resilience rather than incompetence or poor judgment. One crucial insight was that reputation is largely built through small, consistent actions rather than dramatic gestures. People form impressions based on daily interactions, how you treat subordinates, how you respond to pressure, how you handle confidential information, how you support colleagues during difficult times. These micro-interactions often matter more than major accomplishments in determining how others perceive your character. I discovered the power of association in reputation building. Being connected to respected individuals and successful projects enhanced my credibility, even when my direct contribution was limited. Conversely, association with controversial figures or failed initiatives could damage reputation regardless of your actual involvement. This taught me to be strategic about which relationships I cultivated publicly and which I kept private. The role of storytelling in reputation management cannot be overstated. People remember narratives more than facts. So I learned to frame my experiences in ways that reinforce the image I wanted to project. Rather than simply listing accomplishments, I crafted stories that illustrated my problem-solving abilities, my commitment to excellence, or my loyalty to important principles. I learned to anticipate and address potential reputation threats before they materialized. This might involve clarifying my position on controversial issues, ensuring that my motives were understood when taking unpopular but necessary actions, or proactively sharing information that could be misinterpreted if discovered later. The key was maintaining control over the narrative rather than being forced to respond to others' interpretations of events. Perhaps most importantly, I discovered that sustainable reputation management requires genuine substance behind the image. You can create temporary influence through skillful perception management, but lasting influence requires delivering real value and maintaining authentic relationships. The most effective approach is to develop genuine expertise and character while ensuring that these qualities are properly recognized and appreciated by those who matter most to your objectives. The master of reputation management learns to make their influence appear effortless and natural, as if their success flows inevitably from their character and competence rather than from careful strategic positioning. When done properly, people don't see reputation management. They simply see someone who consistently demonstrates the qualities they respect and trust. My observations of papal elections taught me that no matter how skilled you become at influence, external forces beyond your control will constantly reshape the landscape in which you operate. Each new pope brought different priorities, allies, and enemies, forcing everyone in the political system to adapt their strategies or risk becoming irrelevant. This taught me that sustainable influence requires balancing careful preparation with flexible responsiveness to changing circumstances. I learned to distinguish between factors I could control and those I could only influence or must simply accept. My skills, relationships, knowledge, and reputation were largely within my control and deserved the majority of my attention and energy. Market conditions, political upheavals, organizational changes, and other people's decisions were beyond my direct control, but could often be influenced through strategic positioning and relationship building. The key insight was understanding that fortune favors those who position themselves to benefit from multiple possible outcomes. Rather than betting everything on a single scenario, I learned to create what I called optionality, positioning myself so that I could adapt quickly when circumstances changed, taking advantage of opportunities while minimizing exposure to risks. During my diplomatic career, I observed how successful negotiators prepared for uncertainty by developing multiple pathways to their objectives. They identified their core interests, the outcomes they absolutely needed, and remained flexible about the methods for achieving them. When their preferred approach became impossible due to changing circumstances, they could quickly pivot to alternative strategies without losing momentum or credibility. Discovered that adaptability requires maintaining broad networks of relationships rather than depending too heavily on any single connection or alliance. Political fortunes rise and fall unpredictably, and today's powerful ally may become tomorrow's irrelevant exile. By cultivating relationships across different factions and interest groups, I could maintain influence regardless of which particular group gained ascendancy. The balance between preparation and flexibility proved crucial to managing fortune effectively. Over-preparation could lead to rigidity, making it difficult to respond when circumstances demanded different approaches. Under-preparation left me vulnerable to being overwhelmed by events I should have anticipated. The optimal approach involved thorough preparation for the most likely scenarios while maintaining the mental and practical flexibility to handle unexpected developments. I learned to read the early signals that indicated major changes were coming. Political systems, like natural systems, rarely change without warning signs for those who know how to observe them. Shifts in alliances, changes in rhetoric, unusual personnel movements, and alterations in standard procedures often preceded larger transformations. By paying attention to these signals, I could begin adapting my strategy before changes became obvious to everyone else. One of my most valuable techniques was maintaining what I called strategic reserves, resources, relationships, and capabilities that I kept in reserve for unexpected opportunities or challenges. This might involve developing expertise in areas adjacent to my primary responsibilities, maintaining friendships with people outside my immediate professional circle, or saving favors and goodwill for moments when I truly needed them. The psychology of adaptation required accepting that perfect control was impossible while maintaining confidence that skilled responses could improve outcomes regardless of circumstances. I learned to view unexpected changes as problems to be solved rather than disasters to be endured. This mindset helped me identify opportunities within apparent setbacks and maintain the mental clarity necessary for effective decision-making. Under pressure, I discovered that organizations and individuals go through predictable cycles of growth, stability, challenge, and renewal. Understanding these cycles helped me time my initiatives appropriately, pushing forward during periods of openness to change while consolidating gains during more conservative phases. Fighting against these natural rhythms was usually counterproductive, while working with them could amplify the impact of my efforts. Perhaps most importantly, I learned that fortune often favors those who help others adapt to changing circumstances. By becoming someone who could help colleagues, superiors, and subordinates navigate uncertainty and change, I made myself valuable regardless of what specific changes occurred. This created a form of insurance against adverse fortune while positioning me to benefit when conditions improved. The master of fortune management learns to dance with uncertainty rather than fighting it, using change as an opportunity to demonstrate value and build stronger relationships while maintaining steady progress toward long-term objectives. They understand that influence is not about controlling events, but about maintaining the ability to respond effectively whatever events occur. My proposals for Florentine military reform exposed a fundamental truth about organizational loyalty that applies far beyond the battlefield. Hired loyalty is temporary loyalty, and sustainable influence requires building genuine commitment rather than purchasing compliance. I observed how mercenary armies, no matter how well paid, would abandon their employers the moment a better offer appeared or conditions became truly dangerous. The mercenary problem in modern organizations manifests when leaders rely primarily on financial incentives, authority, or fear to motivate their teams. These approaches can produce short-term compliance, but they fail to create the deep commitment necessary for sustained excellence and loyalty. When better opportunities arise or challenges intensify, people motivated only by external rewards will seek alternatives rather than invest extra effort in collective success. I learned that building genuine loyalty requires understanding what each person truly values beyond immediate compensation. Some individuals are motivated by opportunities for growth and learning, others by recognition and status, still others by meaning and purpose in their work. The most effective leaders I observed were those who took time to understand these individual motivations and found ways to align them with organizational objectives. During my time managing diplomatic missions, I discovered that the most reliable team members were those who felt personally invested in our success. This investment came not from higher pay, but from being included in decision-making, having their contributions recognized and valued, and understanding how their work connected to larger purposes they cared about. When people felt like partners rather than hired hands, they brought creativity, initiative, and persistence that could never be purchased. The investment required for building lasting loyalty goes far beyond financial compensation. It requires investing time in relationships, attention to individual development, patience with mistakes made in service of learning, and consistency in supporting team members through both successes and failures. This approach demands more upfront effort than simply hiring mercenaries, but it creates capabilities that cannot be easily replicated or stolen by competitors. I observed that loyal teams develop what I called collective intelligence, the ability to anticipate each other's needs, coordinate effectively without detailed instructions, and maintain high performance even when formal leadership is absent. This collective intelligence emerges only when team members trust each other and share commitment to common objectives that transcend individual self-interest. One crucial insight was that building loyalty requires leaders to be vulnerable and authentic with their teams. People cannot develop genuine commitment to someone they perceive as manipulative or self-serving. I learned to share my real challenges and uncertainties, admit my mistakes openly, and demonstrate through actions that I was as committed to team members' success as I expected them to be to our collective mission. The role of shared adversity in building loyalty cannot be overstated. Teams that successfully navigate challenges together develop bonds that are nearly impossible to break. I learned to frame difficulties as opportunities for the team to prove its capabilities and commitment, rather than as threats to be minimized or hidden. When people succeed together through genuinely challenging circumstances, they develop confidence in their collective ability and trust in their mutual dependence. I discovered that sustainable loyalty requires creating systems and cultures that outlast any individual leader. This meant establishing clear values and standards that guided behavior regardless of who was in charge, developing multiple people with leadership capabilities, and creating processes that supported excellence and fairness even when I was absent. The goal was to build something larger than any individual that people could remain committed to even as personnel changed. Perhaps most importantly, I learned that loyalty must be mutual to be sustainable. Leaders who expect commitment from their teams while remaining uncommitted themselves create cynicism and resentment that ultimately destroys organizational effectiveness. I had to demonstrate through consistent actions that I was as loyal to my team members as I expected them to be to our mission. The economics of loyalty building initially appear inefficient compared to simply hiring mercenaries and managing through rewards and punishments, but the long-term benefits, reduced turnover, increased initiative, better problem solving, stronger resilience during challenges, and higher overall performance, more than compensate for the additional investment required. The master of team building understands that influence through genuine loyalty is exponential rather than linear. Each truly committed team member becomes an extension of your capabilities, multiplying your influence far beyond what you could achieve alone while creating a sustainable foundation for long-term success that survives changes in external circumstances. And competitive pressures. The Pazzi conspiracy against the Medici taught me one of the most crucial lessons about influence. Those who seek to destroy others typically destroy themselves in the process. I witnessed how the conspirators, despite careful planning and powerful backing, ultimately strengthened their enemies while ensuring their own ruin. This revealed that negative influence tactics, undermining, sabotage, and destructive competition are almost always counterproductive strategies that damage the practitioner more than the target. The fundamental flaw in conspiracy thinking is the belief that success requires others to fail. This zero-sum mentality leads to strategies focused on damaging opponents rather than building your own capabilities and value. I observed that people who spent their energy plotting against colleagues inevitably neglected their own development, alienated potential allies, and created reputations that made others reluctant to trust or support them. When Francesco Pazzi and his allies attempted to murder Lorenzo de' Medici during Easter Mass, they believed that eliminating him would automatically transfer his influence to them, but they misunderstood the nature of influence entirely. Lorenzo's power came not from his position alone, but from the network of relationships, obligations, and goodwill he had built over decades. His assassination would have destroyed these assets rather than transferring them, leaving Florence vulnerable to chaos and external enemies. I learned that the costs of negative influence tactics extend far beyond immediate consequences. When you attack others, you force them to defend themselves, creating enemies where none existed before. You also signal to observers that you are dangerous to work with, leading them to limit their engagement with you or actively seek your removal. Most destructively, you train yourself to think in terms of conflict and scarcity, rather than collaboration and abundance. The alternative to destructive competition is what I call competitive excellence, focusing your energy on becoming so valuable that others naturally prefer to work with you rather than against you. This approach channels competitive instincts into positive directions that build your capabilities while creating value for others. When you consistently deliver superior results and help others succeed, you make opposition to your advancement appear unreasonable and counterproductive. During my diplomatic career, I encountered many situations where different factions had legitimate conflicts of interest. Rather than trying to destroy opposing viewpoints, I learned to find solutions that acknowledged different needs and created mutual benefits. This approach often required more creativity and patience than simple opposition, but it produced sustainable agreements and maintained relationships that proved valuable in future negotiations. I discovered that most workplace conflicts stem from misunderstandings, poor communication, or resource scarcity, rather than fundamental incompatibility. By addressing these root causes directly rather than treating symptoms through political maneuvering, I could often transform apparent enemies into allies. This required the courage to have difficult conversations and the skill to frame discussions in terms of shared interests rather than competing positions. One of my most effective techniques for avoiding destructive conflicts was what I called constructive containment. When faced with truly unreasonable or destructive individuals, rather than engaging in direct confrontation, I would limit their ability to damage shared interests while maintaining professional relationships. This might involve ensuring they had limited access to critical information, building coalitions that could counteract their negative influence, or simply documenting interactions to protect against false accusations. The psychology of conspiracy thinking often stems from feelings of powerlessness or frustration with legitimate grievances. I learned to address these underlying emotions directly rather than responding only to their destructive manifestations. By helping people find positive ways to address their concerns and achieve their objectives, I could often redirect their energy from opposition to collaboration. Perhaps most importantly, I discovered that building a reputation for fairness and constructive problem-solving creates a form of insurance against conspiracy and sabotage. When people know you consistently treat others fairly and look for win-win solutions, they are less likely to view you as a threat requiring elimination. Instead, they see you as someone who can help them achieve their objectives through collaboration. The master of positive influence understands that destroying others is unnecessary when you can simply become more valuable than they are. By focusing on excellence, relationship building, and creative problem solving, you create sustainable, competitive advantages that make destructive tactics both unnecessary and counterproductive. This approach builds long-term influence while maintaining the relationships and reputation necessary for continued success. My attempts to gain employment with the Medici after their return from exile taught me the unique challenges faced by newcomers entering established organizations. Unlike inherited positions or internal promotions, the outsider must prove their value without the benefit of existing relationships, institutional knowledge, or assumed legitimacy. My letters of recommendation from this period reveal the delicate balance required between demonstrating competence and showing appropriate deference to established power structures. The fundamental challenge for any newcomer is overcoming the natural resistance that established systems have to change and outside influence. Existing stakeholders have invested time and energy in current arrangements and may view new arrivals as threats to their position or criticism of their past decisions. I learned that successful entry requires understanding and addressing these concerns proactively, rather than simply hoping competence will overcome resistance. When I sought to return to public service under the Medici, I had to overcome the liability of my association with the previous Republican government. Rather than denying or apologizing for my past service, I reframed my experience as an asset that could help the Medici govern more effectively. I demonstrated knowledge of administrative processes, foreign relationships, and domestic challenges that could benefit their rule, positioning myself as a valuable resource rather than a potential threat. I discovered that newcomers must earn credibility through small successes before being trusted with larger responsibilities. This requires the patience to accept initial assignments that may seem beneath your capabilities while delivering results that exceed expectations. Each successful project builds trust and demonstrates your value to the organization, creating opportunities for increased responsibility and influence. The importance of finding sponsors and advocates within the established system cannot be overstated. I learned to identify individuals who had both the influence to support my advancement and the motivation to do so. This might involve finding people who could benefit from my skills, those who valued fresh perspectives, or those who were secure enough in their own positions to support potential competition. One crucial insight was understanding the difference between formal and informal power structures within established organizations. The official hierarchy might suggest one path to influence, while the actual decision-making process might follow completely different channels. I invested time in understanding how things really worked, who had genuine influence, how decisions were actually made, and what unwritten rules governed behavior. The newcomer's advantage lies in bringing fresh perspectives and capabilities that established players may lack. However, this advantage must be deployed carefully to avoid triggering defensive reactions. I learned to introduce new ideas gradually, giving others time to adapt and find ways to support innovations without feeling threatened or diminished by them. Building relationships as an outsider requires different strategies than maintaining existing connections. I had to prove my trustworthiness through consistent actions over time, demonstrate my commitment to organizational success rather than personal advancement, and show respect for institutional traditions while offering improvements where appropriate. Discovered that successful integration requires learning the organization's culture, values, and communication styles quickly. This goes beyond formal policies to include understanding how people really interact, what types of behavior are rewarded or punished, and what unstated assumptions guide decision-making. Failure to adapt to these cultural norms can undermine even the most competent newcomer. The timing of assertiveness proved crucial to successful entry. Early on, I focused primarily on listening, learning, and contributing value without challenging existing arrangements. As I built credibility and relationships, I could gradually begin offering more substantial insights and suggestions. Premature attempts to drive change often backfire by confirming fears about disruptive outsiders. Perhaps most importantly, I learned that successful entry requires genuine commitment to the organization's success, rather than viewing it merely as a vehicle for personal advancement. When people sense that you are truly invested in collective objectives, they become more willing to share information, provide opportunities, and support your integration into the established system. The master of organizational entry understands that becoming an insider is a gradual process that requires patience, strategic thinking, and genuine value creation. Success comes not from demanding recognition based on external credentials, but from earning acceptance through demonstrated contributions and authentic relationship building within the new environment. My personal observations of how seasons affected human behavior and political activity, revealed that successful influence requires adapting your approach to the natural rhythms of organizational life. Just as farmers know when to plant, cultivate, and harvest, effective leaders understand when to push forward aggressively, when to consolidate gains, when to prepare for challenges, and when to allow periods of rest and renewal. During my years in government service, I noticed that certain times were naturally more conducive to different types of initiatives. The period following successful projects created openness to new ideas and expansion, similar to spring's receptivity to new growth. Times of stability and steady progress resembled summer's abundance, when focus should shift to cultivation and optimization. Periods of challenge and uncertainty mirrored autumn's preparation for difficulty, requiring consolidation and resource gathering. Organizational winters, times of crisis, cutbacks, or major transitions, demanded conservation of energy and careful survival strategies. I learned to read the seasonal indicators in organizational climate. Spring periods were characterized by optimism, available resources, leadership openness to change, and general momentum toward growth. These were optimal times for proposing new initiatives, building new relationships, and expanding influence through value creation. The energy was naturally aligned with forward movement, making it easier to gain support for ambitious projects. Summer periods reflected organizational confidence and steady performance. During these times, I focused on deepening existing relationships, refining processes, and building the infrastructure necessary for sustained success. Rather than launching dramatic new initiatives, summer seasons called for careful cultivation of existing opportunities and systematic skill development that would pay dividends during more challenging periods. Autumn periods required preparation and consolidation. I could sense these approaching through subtle signals: increased caution in decision-making, more frequent discussions of potential challenges, shifts in resource allocation toward defensive priorities. During organizational autumns, I learned to strengthen my position by demonstrating reliability, building reserves of goodwill and capability, and positioning myself as someone who could help navigate coming difficulties. Winter periods demanded different strategies entirely. When organizations faced genuine crises, downsizing, leadership changes, or market challenges, the focus shifted to survival and essential functions. During these times, I concentrated on protecting core relationships, delivering reliable value in critical areas, and avoiding unnecessary risks that could threaten my position during vulnerable periods. The key insight was that fighting against seasonal rhythms was usually counterproductive and exhausting. Trying to launch ambitious new initiatives during organizational winters often failed because attention and resources were focused elsewhere. Similarly, becoming overly conservative during spring periods meant missing opportunities that might not recur for years. I developed techniques for sensing seasonal transitions before they became obvious to others. Changes in leadership tone, shifts in meeting agendas, alterations in budget discussions, and modifications in strategic priorities often signaled seasonal changes months before their full impact became apparent. By recognizing these early indicators, I could adjust my approach proactively rather than reactively. The management of energy and timing proved crucial to seasonal leadership. During periods conducive to my objectives, I learned to work intensively and make maximum progress while conditions were favorable. During less favorable periods, I conserved energy, focused on maintenance activities, and prepared for the next opportunity cycle. This approach prevented burnout while maximizing effectiveness. I discovered that different people respond to seasonal changes in various ways. Some individuals become energized during challenging periods and perform best under pressure, while others excel during stable, optimistic times. Understanding these individual patterns allowed me to deploy team members most effectively and provide appropriate support during their less optimal seasons. Perhaps most importantly, I learned that master influencers create their own seasons through strategic initiative timing. Rather than simply reacting to organizational rhythms, they could influence those rhythms by introducing energy during dormant periods, proposing solutions during challenge periods, and providing vision during uncertain times. This required understanding not just when to follow seasonal patterns, but when and how to shape them. The Siege of Pisa taught me that strategic thinking, the ability to see several moves ahead and understand how current actions create future possibilities, is perhaps the most transferable skill for gaining influence in any competitive environment. Military campaigns revealed patterns of thought that apply equally to business negotiations, organizational politics, and professional advancement. I learned that most people think tactically rather than strategically, focusing on immediate challenges and opportunities without considering how their choices shape future options. This creates enormous advantages for those who can think systematically about chains of cause and effect, understanding how today's decisions create tomorrow's constraints and possibilities. The first principle of strategic thinking is what military theorists call terrain analysis, understanding the landscape in which you are operating. In organizational contexts, this means mapping the formal and informal power structures, identifying key decision makers and influencers, understanding resource flows and dependencies, and recognizing the constraints and opportunities inherent in your situation. During my military planning for Florence, I discovered that superior strategy could often overcome superior force through better positioning and timing. The same principle applies to influence. You don't need to be the most powerful person in the room if you can position yourself more advantageously than those who have greater formal authority. This might involve controlling critical information, building stronger coalitions, or timing your initiatives more effectively. I learned to think in terms of what military strategists call lines of operation, multiple pathways toward your objective that can be pursued simultaneously or sequentially. Rather than betting everything on a single approach, strategic thinkers develop several ways to achieve their goals, allowing them to adapt when circumstances change without abandoning their ultimate objectives. The concept of strategic reserves proved crucial to maintaining flexibility and responding to unexpected opportunities or threats. Just as military commanders keep forces in reserve for decisive moments, influential people maintain unused capabilities, relationships, favors, resources, information that can be deployed when needed. This requires the discipline to avoid using all your assets for immediate gains. I discovered that understanding your opponent's motivations and constraints is often more valuable than understanding their strengths and weaknesses. During negotiations with enemy city-states, I focused less on their military capabilities and more on their political pressures, economic needs, and internal divisions. This allowed me to craft proposals that addressed their real concerns rather than their stated positions. The timing of strategic moves proved as important as their substance. I learned to recognize moments when organizations and individuals were most receptive to influence during transitions, crises, successes, or periods of uncertainty when normal patterns were disrupted. These windows of opportunity often closed quickly, requiring preparation and decisive action when they appeared. One of my most effective strategic tools was what I called constructive ambiguity, maintaining multiple interpretations of my intentions until the optimal moment for clarification. This prevented opponents from mounting effective countermeasures while keeping allies committed to cooperation. The key was ensuring that eventual clarification aligned with what people hoped I meant rather than contradicting their expectations. I discovered that strategic thinking requires balancing offensive and defensive considerations simultaneously. While pursuing your objectives, you must also protect against others' attempts to block or undermine your progress. This might involve building redundant relationships, documenting agreements carefully, or maintaining alternative pathways to critical resources. The role of intelligence gathering in strategic thinking cannot be overstated. Success requires better information than your competitors about changing conditions, emerging opportunities, and potential threats. I developed systematic methods for collecting, analyzing, and acting on information that others either missed or misinterpreted. Perhaps most importantly, I learned that strategic thinking is ultimately about creating and maintaining options rather than following predetermined plans. The most successful strategists were those who positioned themselves to benefit from multiple possible futures while maintaining the flexibility to adapt when circumstances changed unexpectedly. The master strategist understands that influence is a long-term game where current sacrifices often create future advantages, and apparent setbacks can be transformed into strategic gains through proper positioning and timing. They think in terms of campaigns rather than battles, understanding that ultimate success comes from systematic advantage building rather than tactical brilliance alone. My diplomatic correspondence to foreign courts revealed that the most powerful form of influence often comes not from what you say, but from how you frame information to align with your audience's existing beliefs, needs, and motivations. I learned that truth itself is less important than effective truth, presenting accurate information in ways that lead people to the conclusions you want them to reach. The foundation of persuasive communication is understanding that people filter all information through their existing mental frameworks. They accept ideas that confirm their current beliefs and reject those that challenge their fundamental assumptions, regardless of factual accuracy. This taught me that successful influence requires presenting information in ways that feel consistent with what people already think they know. During my negotiations with French and Spanish courts, I discovered that the same factual situation could be described in completely different ways depending on what outcome I wanted to achieve. When seeking military support, I emphasized Florence's strategic value and the threats posed by our enemies. When negotiating trade agreements, I focused on economic opportunities and mutual benefits. The facts remained constant, but their presentation changed based on what would resonate most strongly with each audience. I learned to use what I called selective emphasis, highlighting certain aspects of complex situations while downplaying others. This was not deception, but strategic framing that directed attention toward the elements most likely to support my objectives. If a proposed policy had both risks and benefits, I would emphasize the benefits when speaking to supporters and address the risks directly when speaking to skeptics. The strategic use of details and omissions proved crucial to effective communication. Too much information overwhelms people and allows them to focus on elements that might undermine your message. Too little information creates suspicion and appears manipulative. I learned to provide exactly the right amount of detail to support my conclusions while avoiding information that might create doubts or resistance. One of my most effective techniques was building narratives that supported my goals rather than simply presenting facts and expecting people to draw logical conclusions. People remember stories better than statistics and are more emotionally engaged by narratives that help them understand their role in larger events. I learned to frame situations as stories with clear protagonists, antagonists, and moral outcomes that aligned with my objectives. The importance of audience analysis cannot be overstated. The same message delivered to different audiences requires completely different approaches. When writing to military leaders, I used language emphasizing honor, duty, and strategic advantage. When addressing merchants, I focused on practical benefits and economic opportunities. When communicating with scholars, I emphasized historical precedents and logical reasoning. I discovered that effective communication often requires addressing unstated objections and concerns before they can undermine your message. By acknowledging potential problems and providing responses, I could prevent resistance from developing while demonstrating that I had thought carefully about the situation. This created confidence in my judgment while preemptively neutralizing opposition arguments. the timing of information release proved as important as its content. I learned to sequence revelations strategically, building understanding and acceptance, gradually rather than overwhelming people with complete information all at once. This allowed me to guide people through logical progressions that led naturally to the conclusions I wanted them to reach. The role of emotion in communication cannot be ignored, even in apparently rational environments. People make decisions emotionally and then justify them logically, so effective communication must engage both emotional and rational responses. I learned to connect factual information to emotional outcomes that mattered to my audience: security, prosperity, recognition, or other deeply held values. Perhaps most importantly, I discovered that sustainable influence requires maintaining credibility over time through consistent accuracy in your communications. While you can frame information strategically, you cannot afford to be caught in outright deceptions or significant omissions that undermine trust. Your reputation for honesty, even when presenting information selectively, becomes one of your most valuable assets. The master communicator understands that influence comes not from having better facts, but from presenting facts in ways that make your desired outcome seem like the obvious conclusion. They learn to speak their audience's language, both literally and figuratively, creating messages that feel natural and compelling, rather than forced or manipulative. The routine I developed during my exile to maintain mental sharpness and strategic thinking became the foundation for a systematic approach to building influence that can transform your professional effectiveness in just 90 days. This is not about manipulation in the sinister sense, but about developing the authentic skills and relationships that allow you to make your voice heard and your ideas implemented. The first 30 days focus on observation and foundation building. Begin each morning by spending 15 minutes analyzing the power dynamics in your workplace. Map the formal hierarchy, but more importantly, identify who really influences decisions, who gets consulted before important choices are made, whose opinions carry disproportionate weight in meetings, who serves as a bridge between different departments or factions. Write these observations in a private journal, building your understanding of how influence actually flows in your organization. During week 1, practice the art of strategic listening. In every conversation, focus more on understanding the other person's motivations, fears, and desires than on advancing your own agenda. Ask questions that reveal what people truly care about beyond their official responsibilities. Most people feel unheard in organizational settings, so becoming someone who truly listens creates immediate differentiation and begins building the foundation for future influence. Week 2 introduces the practice of value creation without expectation of immediate return. Identify small ways you can help colleagues succeed, sharing useful information, making helpful introductions, offering assistance with challenging projects. The key is providing genuine value that costs you little but benefits them significantly. This activates the reciprocity principle while establishing your reputation as someone who contributes to others' success. Week 3 focuses on building your credibility systematically. Choose one area of expertise relevant to your work and commit to becoming genuinely knowledgeable about recent developments, best practices, and emerging trends. Share insights from your learning in appropriate settings, positioning yourself as someone who stays current and thinks strategically about your field. Week 4 introduces the practice of strategic positioning. Begin volunteering for projects that will increase your visibility with decision-makers, expand your network across departments, and develop skills that will be valuable in future opportunities. Avoid the trap of taking on everything. Instead, choose opportunities that align with your longer-term influence objectives. The second 30 days shift focus to active relationship building and influence testing. Begin each day by identifying one person whose support could advance your objectives and finding an authentic way to strengthen that relationship. This might involve scheduling informal conversations, collaborating on projects, or simply investing time in understanding their perspectives and challenges. Week 5 emphasizes the development of coalition-building skills. Practice finding common ground between people with different viewpoints and facilitating conversations that lead to mutually beneficial solutions. Start with low-stakes situations where you can experiment with bringing people together around shared interests. Week 6 introduces the art of strategic communication. Begin framing your ideas in terms of benefits to your audience rather than features you find compelling. When proposing solutions, lead with outcomes that matter to decision-makers rather than processes that interest you. Practice telling stories that illustrate your points rather than relying solely on logical arguments. Week 7 focuses on managing up effectively. Schedule regular check-ins with your supervisor to understand their priorities, challenges, and success metrics. Begin anticipating their needs and providing information or assistance before being asked. The goal is becoming someone they rely on for insight and execution. Week 8 introduces influence through expertise. Begin sharing your knowledge systematically through informal presentations, written summaries, or consultation on relevant issues. Position yourself as someone who can help others understand complex situations and identify effective solutions. The final 30 days concentrate on consolidation and advanced techniques. By this point, you should notice increased respect for your opinions, more frequent consultation on important issues, and greater access to decision-makers and information. Week 9 emphasizes the practice of strategic patience. Begin timing your initiatives more carefully, waiting for moments when conditions are most favorable for acceptance. Practice saying no to good opportunities in order to save your resources for great ones. Week 10 introduces advanced coalitions. Building. Begin bringing together people from different areas who can benefit from collaboration, positioning yourself as a connector and facilitator. The goal is becoming someone who creates value through relationship building and strategic thinking. Week 11 focuses on reputation management. Begin consciously reinforcing the professional image you want to project through consistent demonstration of your key strengths and values. Pay attention to how others perceive your contributions and adjust your approach to maximize positive recognition. Week 12 emphasizes sustainable influence building. Reflect on the progress made during the previous 11 weeks and identify which techniques have been most effective in your specific environment. Commit to maintaining daily practices that continue building your influence systematically rather than episodically. Throughout all 90 days, measure your progress through concrete indicators, increased consultation on important decisions, greater access to information and opportunities, more frequent invitations to participate in strategic discussions, and expanded network of allies and supporters. The transformation comes not from dramatic gestures, but from consistent daily practices that gradually shift how others perceive your value and capabilities. My masterwork, The Prince, has influenced leaders for over 5 centuries because it captured timeless principles rather than temporary tactics. This taught me that the highest form of influence is building something that survives your departure, ideas, systems, relationships, and capabilities that continue generating value long after you have moved on to other challenges. The difference between power and influence became clear to me through observing various political figures throughout my career. Power is the ability to compel compliance through authority, resources, or fear, but it disappears when you lose your position or when circumstances change. Influence is the ability to shape thinking and behavior through respect, credibility, and genuine value creation, and it can survive changes in formal authority or organizational structure. I learned that sustainable influence requires building 3 types of legacy: intellectual, relational, and institutional. Intellectual legacy involves the ideas, insights, and ways of thinking that you introduce to your organization or field. Relational legacy encompasses the people you develop, the networks you create, and the collaborative relationships that outlast your direct involvement. Institutional legacy includes the systems, processes, and cultural changes that continue operating according to principles you established. During my government service, I observed leaders who created lasting intellectual legacies by introducing new ways of understanding complex problems. Rather than simply solving immediate challenges, they changed how people thought about entire categories of issues. This required not just expertise, but the ability to communicate insights in ways that others could understand, remember, and apply in new situations. The development of others proved crucial to building relational legacy. I learned that the most influential leaders were those who invested time in developing the capabilities and careers of people around them. When these individuals advanced to positions of greater responsibility, they carried forward the approaches, values, and relationships they had learned, extending the original leader's influence far beyond their direct reach. Building institutional legacy required thinking beyond personal success to organizational improvement. This meant creating systems that functioned effectively regardless of who operated them, establishing processes that continued generating value after my departure, and influencing organizational culture in ways that persisted through changes in personnel and leadership. I discovered that legacy building requires balancing immediate effectiveness with long-term impact. Sometimes the most sustainable approach involves accepting slower progress in the short term in order to build capabilities and understanding that will accelerate progress in the future. This requires confidence that your contributions will be recognized and valued over time, even if they are not immediately apparent. The role of mentorship in sustainable influence cannot be overstated. By developing others who shared my approaches and values, I could multiply my impact far beyond what I could achieve through direct action alone. This required investing time in teaching, providing opportunities for others to practice and develop skills, and creating environments where people could learn from both successes and failures. I learned that creating lasting change requires working with organizational culture rather than against it. Sustainable innovations must feel consistent with existing values and identity, even as they introduce new capabilities and approaches. This means understanding what people already care about and finding ways to connect new ideas to those existing. Commitments. The importance of documentation and knowledge transfer became clear through my own writing. Ideas that exist only in one person's mind disappear when that person leaves, but insights that are captured, organized, and shared can influence future generations. I made systematic efforts to document successful approaches, lessons learned, and principles that could guide others facing similar challenges. Perhaps most importantly, I discovered that sustainable influence requires focusing on principles rather than personalities. While personal relationships are crucial for immediate effectiveness, lasting impact comes from establishing ways of thinking and operating that make sense regardless of who is involved. This means teaching people to understand why certain approaches work rather than simply following instructions. The measurement of legacy requires patience and perspective. Unlike quarterly results or annual performance reviews, the true impact of sustainable influence often becomes apparent only years or decades later. This requires faith that's consistent. Efforts to build capabilities, develop people, and improve systems will eventually generate returns that justify the investment. The master of sustainable influence understands that their greatest achievement is not what they accomplish directly, but what continues to be accomplished by others using principles, relationships, and systems they helped create. They measure success not just by their own advancement, but by the continued effectiveness and growth of the people and organizations they have influenced. If I could write one final letter to modern practitioners of influence, bridging the wisdom of Renaissance Florence with the challenges you face today, it would contain these essential truths that transcend time, technology, and cultural change. The fundamental principles of human nature that I observed 5 centuries ago remain unchanged in your modern world. People still respond to the same basic motivations: the desire for security, recognition, purpose, and belonging. They still make decisions emotionally and justify them rationally. They still follow leaders who provide genuine value while resisting those who appear purely self-serving. Your technological tools may be more sophisticated, but the human hearts and minds you seek to influence operate according to the same patterns I documented in Renaissance Italy. Your greatest advantage as a modern practitioner is access to information and communication capabilities that would have seemed magical in my time. But this advantage becomes a liability if you forget that influence is fundamentally about relationships between human beings. No amount of data analysis or digital communication can substitute for the face-to-face interactions that build trust, the personal understanding that reveals true motivations, and the authentic concern for others' success that creates lasting loyalty. The speed of modern life creates both opportunities and temptations that require careful navigation. While you can build networks and share ideas faster than ever before, the fundamentals of influence still require time to develop. Trust cannot be rushed, competence cannot be faked indefinitely, and sustainable relationships cannot be built through shortcuts or manipulation. Resist the pressure to seek immediate results when long-term effectiveness requires patient investment in capabilities and connections. Your next steps should begin with honest self-assessment of your current influence capabilities. Are you genuinely valuable to the people whose support you need? Do you understand their real motivations beyond what they say publicly? Can you adapt your approach based on changing circumstances and different personalities? Are you building influence through contribution and competence, or relying too heavily on position and politics? The development of influence skills requires deliberate practice, just like any other professional capability. Choose specific techniques from what I have shared and practice them systematically in low-stakes situations before applying them to critical challenges. Study the successful influencers in your environment to understand how timeless principles manifest in your particular context. Most importantly, maintain the humility to learn from both successes and failures. Remember that ethical influence, building power through genuine value creation and mutual benefit, is not just morally superior to manipulation, but practically more effective in the long run. People eventually recognize when they are being used rather than served, and their resistance will ultimately undermine any temporary gains achieved through deceptive tactics. The most sustainable influence comes from aligning your success with the success of others. The responsibility that comes with influence cannot be ignored. As you develop these capabilities, you gain the power to shape other people's decisions, careers, and lives. This power must be exercised with wisdom and restraint, remembering that influence is a tool for creating value rather than simply advancing personal interests. The leaders who are remembered positively are those who use their influence to benefit something larger than themselves. Your modern context provides opportunities for influence that extend far beyond organizational boundaries. Through digital platforms and global connectivity, you can potentially influence people you will never meet in person, contributing to conversations and movements that shape entire industries or societies. This expanded reach multiplies both the opportunities and the responsibilities associated with effective influence. Continue developing these skills by studying both historical examples and contemporary practitioners. Read about leaders who built lasting influence across different contexts and time periods. Observe successful people in your current environment to understand how they apply influence principles in your specific situation. Most importantly, practice these techniques consistently while maintaining authentic concern for others' success and well-being. The path forward requires balancing confidence with humility, ambition with service, and strategic thinking with genuine relationships. You now possess the same principles that have guided effective leaders for centuries, but your success will depend on how skillfully and ethically you apply them to the unique challenges and opportunities of your time and place. Remember that influence is not a destination, but a continuous journey of learning, growing, and contributing. The techniques I have shared are tools, but tools require skilled hands and wise hearts to create lasting value. Your legacy will be determined not by how much influence you accumulate, but by how you use that influence to create positive change in the lives of others and the organizations you serve. Go forward with purpose, proceed with patience, and lead with principles that honor both your ambitions and your obligations to those who will be affected by your influence.